was any real news coverage on the 3 ninjas that I'd killed once the bodies were found, I was sure that Dad would somehow figure it out. As a precaution, I'd made sure not to leave any of my knives at the scene of the crime. That might just save my ass. I entered the house quietly at about 4 in the morning and closed the door just as quietly behind me. I hurried across the living room. My father's bedroom door was cracked open and the space beyond was empty. I hoped this meant he'd been out on his own business as opposed to shadowing me. If he'd seen me run headlong towards the sound of gunshots, there was nothing I could possibly say that would get him to forgive me. I had felt the underlying edge in the tone of his voice when he'd been talking to me back at St. Mary's steeple. He'd meant it. His face had darkened at my fearlessness. I needed to be more careful, or my father would get mad, and I'm pretty sure I don't want to know what my father looks like when he's mad at me. Ever. I oughtn't take him and his leniency for granted. I needed to be more careful. But I'd done the right thing that night, even if it had been by sheer luck. It was nice to have a real house, especially such a cute one. I slipped into my bedroom, tossed my backpack to the side, and then flopped back onto the bed with a heavy sigh. For a while, I just lay there watching the ceiling, still in 2 layers of hood and dressed from head to toe in hidden gear. Then a smile wiggled slowly over my mouth and grew broader and broader. I wasn't even sure exactly what I was smiling at. But oh, how I smiled from ear to ear. Then I started laughing. And then I lifted my hands and pressed my palms over my eyes, as if the pressure could somehow keep from getting any louder. I was so tired and so happy. I couldn't remember ever having been so happy. Could we hang out again? Would we? We have each other's numbers, and both of us are frequently bored and have copious hours whilst left to our own devices in a given day. But what if he had second thoughts? Nonsense! He was already sneaking to the surface, wasn't he? Plus, I could easily smuggle myself down into the sewers if I had to, and he'd explain that he wasn't forbidden from leaving the house so much as he was prohibited from going topside. Well, okay. But what if Sandro had second thoughts about me? I'm loud, and I laugh at inappropriate times, and I have a caustic sense of humor, and I'm bossy, too, and I keep getting caught staring at him. But he'd stayed, and he'd talked to me for hours and hours, despite having numerous opportunities to slink off or even excuse himself. He'd started whole units of conversation himself. Could we hang out again tomorrow? Every day? Okay. I'm getting way ahead of myself. I probably ought to keep my head low for the next few days, if only to get over this weird giddy feeling and keep from tipping off my dad that I'd done anything stupid. Arrgh. It's like there's lightning in my limbs. I gotta shake it out. Gotta disperse the adrenaline. At last I sat up and started getting ready for bed. As I set aside my night suit and weapons, I spied the latest edition of my favorite comic book series, still sitting out on the little reading desk beside my bed. I paused, startled by the orange Nickelodeon logo. Then I picked it up, gathered up the rest of my comics, took down and folded up 2 of my pin-up posters, and filed them all into a tidy bundle, which I wrapped up with a rubber band. I stuffed them into a cardboard box and tucked them under the bed and back away in the far corner. I crawled into bed, pulled the sheets up over my head and drifted off to sleep with a smile on my face.
I slipped quietly into the front door of my family's unusual home and silently leaned into the wall that I might gracefully take off my shoes. In the distance, I could hear my youngest uncles practicing in the dojo. I rinsed off my shoes and settled them in their place. I sneaked through the living room and I crept to my bedroom door. And folded myself silently inside. No sooner had I eased my own door shut than I heard the front door to the lair open, signaling my eldest uncle had returned from patrol. I glanced at my alarm clock to mark the time and then unbuckled the holster for my kamas and gingerly set the weapons upon my dresser, listening to the various uncles moving around outside in the kitchen. I peeled out of my coat and made sure it had stayed clean of slime. It went to hang on the coat rack by the door. I sniffed at my gloves. Did they smell of oil? Pizza? No. They got neatly folded up and placed into the pockets of my coat for the next time I went out and explored the sewers. I turned and walked about the room, peering into the aquarium of my large collection of flesh ball pythons and terrapins to make sure no one was in distress or needed feeding. The tortoise woke up to greet me, and I peeled a banana for the little guy. At last I came to the head of my bed and to the elderly dwarf crocodile where she'd fallen asleep on top of my pillow. She lifted her head for a good eyebrow scratching that I dutifully supplied as I sat myself slowly down beside her. Had that just happened? All of it? Any of it? I was technically allowed out to roam the sewers, rails, maintenance tunnels, and my family had even mandated that I bring a disguise and remained armed, just in case. Provisions, of course, which had ironically made it possible to sneak topside. But I usually tried to avoid worrying anyone with my comings and goings, and I didn't want to talk to anyone right now, or answer their innocent questions. I might have seemed out of it and given away this secret. I could count the number of human faces I'd seen up close and in person for more than an instant in just one hand. If I added in mutant faces, my complete collection of acquaintances might have possibly spilled past 2 hands. And while it had been dark, there had been enough ambient light to make out that the color of her hair was blonde and her face was sharp-featured. What drove home her realness was the memory of infrared, the color of heat oozing out from within her. It was something I never got to see when watching people on the computer or on television screens. Had we actually talked about ninja clans, throwing knives, parents, pizza, everything? Everything for hours and hours? She hadn't, gotten bored? My only proof the conversation had happened was that I wasn't hungry, because I'd eaten an entire large pizza and 3 ice creams and drank 2 bottles of soda. She likes Dr. Pepper and veggie pizzas and unnecessarily large amounts of cheese. I dug out my phone and opened my contacts, and sure enough, nestled beside emergency numbers for family and close family friends, lay free pizza. I tapped it to see the unfamiliar number and to memorize it. It really had happened. I sawed my beak a moment and then felt the smile leak out to the corners of my mouth, where it overtook the whole of my face. It had really happened, and she said she'd send me a text when she was free. Did that mean we might be able to hang out again? Tomorrow? I leaned back against the wall, grinning dumbly to myself, cradling the phone in both hands. Then I decided to lay down and kicked up my leg and leaned my head back atop my crock, just like she was a pillow, since she didn't seem inclined on moving. She did not disabuse me of the notion that she was my pillow. I reached up to rub under her chin and grinned stupidly at my phone for a very long time. At last I switched it off and dropped it against my chest and rocked comfortably side to side upon my shell. I dared not laugh, not with uncles just outside, not even when it would surely be harmless. Who would investigate a laugh? Because the secret was just too exciting. Wild card. It suited her.